welcome. Hello, I'm Father Mitch Pacwa. Welcome to Ewtn Live, where we bring you guests from around the world. And tonight, we'll be talking with Alan Sears. He's the founder of the legal organization called Alliance Defending Freedom, which helps Christians around the world defend their religious liberties. But before we start that conversation, we want to talk with Peter Gagnon, who is the Ewtn Vice President for Programming and Production, about some new things that you'll be seeing on Ewtn. Peter, what do you have in store for us this Holy Week?
Well, it is the holiest week of the year, and as we prepare to enter into the Triduum, we want to make sure that our viewers were aware of all the programming that we have in honor of this season. We always try to follow the liturgical season with our programming, and so we have events from Rome, from here with our friars, from Washington, D.C., and also not just live events, but specials focus on the life, death, and resurrection of Christ, including programs from the Holy Land, etc. We also want to, a lot of our viewers are homebound, so this gives them an opportunity to participate in the liturgical events in the life of the church from home. And then next week is Divine Mercy Sunday, so we will also be bringing programming from Lithuania, where St. Faustina was for a little while, and also from Stockbridge, Massachusetts, where they have the big event, Divine Mercy event every year, and from Hanceville. So people should tune in, go to our website, ewtn.com, and you'll be able to see all the special programmings for these next few weeks.
Great. This is a very important time for us to make sure we give extra attention to our own spiritual development in this Holy Week. This is our week of all weeks of the year, so we want to make sure that there's extra prayer and reflection. So thank you for letting us know about these coming programs. And we will be back in just a couple of minutes with tonight's guest, so please stay with us. Thank you and welcome back. For 25 years now, the Alliance Defending Freedom is an organization that has been working to keep the legal doors open for the gospel and to transform the legal system for Jesus Christ. Now, that is no small task in the world we live in today. Here to tell us how they do it and why is the founder of Alliance Defending Freedom. Please welcome Mr. Alan Sears.
Thank you,
Alan,
Father.
welcome.
It is a great joy to be with you, and just to launch our conversation, I'll just remind our viewers of one of the earliest things that Pope Francis said in his papacy. He talked about religious freedom, and he talked about how religious freedom and right of conscience is not something just for the church on Sunday. It's something for every aspect of our life, in every aspect of our vocation, day by day, 24/7. And he's repeated that theme throughout his papacy, picking up on his predecessor, Pope Benedict, and his predecessor before that, St. John Paul II. And that is the essence of really the battle that we're going to talk about in the program tonight, is the battle between those that want to suppress and limit the right of conscience and religious freedom, and those that want to preserve, protect, and expand that liberty.
I think it's useful to remember that when the Soviet Union started in 1917, they came up with a new constitution. And within that, they guaranteed freedom of worship. but not freedom of religion. And that's an important distinction because they used the phrase freedom of worship to trick people into supporting them.
Very astute observation, Father, because as we saw with a number of politicians in the last election cycle, there was a discussion in the United States of exactly this thing.
Exactly.
Because freedom of worship basically is defined to mean what you can do within the four corners of your church.
Or synagogue,
mosque,
temple, whatever.
But of course, then we find that even those who talk about freedom of worship within the four walls want to put other limits on what you can do even within those four walls. For example, they want to interfere with the words that a pastor, a priest, a rabbi can say from their pulpit. There are those that actually want to limit the speech that you can say in a homily.
As a matter of fact, I believe the mayor or city council of the city of Houston, Texas, went and had the sermon notes of ministers seized as some sort of evidence because they disagreed with her on some, I think it was double gender bathrooms.
Yeah, what happened there, the Houston adopted a so-called bathroom ordinance, basically saying that anybody could go into a bathroom of any other gender or sex. The good people of Houston rose up, led by pastors, priests, and others. Cardinal Decarlo was involved in this effort. They gathered petitions, they got enough, put it on the ballot, voted overwhelmingly to say no. The city then ignored it. A huge legal battle erupted, and as part of that battle, the mayor's lawyer subpoenaed not just the sermons of the pastors, which had in many cases been broadcast on television or radio, but also asked for 17 other items. Our attorneys were very much involved in this matter, and they asked for, among other things, private conversations and records of private conversations between clergy and their parishioners. Things that would be just unbelievably inappropriate for anyone to see outside of the clergy penitent or clergy congressional relationships.
Yeah, we protect the rights usually of lawyers and their clients. That's supposed to be sacred, and sometimes even that gets violated. The privacy between a doctor and patient is also supposed to remain private and protected by law.
And in both of those cases, it's the right of the patient, not the doctor, it's the right of the client, not the lawyer, that is protected. And I know where you're going, Father.
And then they're pushing to get rid of the right of parishioners' private conversations with their pastors, which often entails sins. Certainly in our church where we hear confessions, but also in other churches, they meet in, as they say, in the minister's parlor, and they have a talk about and pray with issues. They don't have confession as a sacrament.
Even non-sacramental churches have very intimate conversations with their parishioners. They have confessions of sin. They have seeking solutions to problems, spiritual guidance.
And if
this is incredibly private.
If the state interferes, people won't come to talk to us. Well, because they would have legitimate fear.
And again, this is back to freedom of worship versus freedom of religion.
Exactly.
And I'm delighted to say, because of a strong stand and because those pastors stood firm in Houston, and ultimately the mayor backed down and the case was resolved in favor of the religious liberty. And I might mention, two of the pastors that were involved were immigrants to the United States. One had escaped from Vietnam, from the communist problems there with the war in Vietnam. Another pastor had escaped from Cuba. So two people had escaped from the clutches of communism who were now being told in the United States to turn over their private internal documents of their church and their conversations with their constituents. But because they stood and others were able to stand with them firmly, that was one.
You do a lot of stuff, and I want to take a look. We have a video clip that deals with some of the other issues that you're dealing, and use that as a way for us to continue this conversation and for our viewers. So let's take a look at that clip on the Alliance Defending Freedom.
As a kid, the grown-ups used to ask us all the time, what do you want to be when you grow up? I told them, I want to be a fireman when I grow up. In 1981, my dream came true. Being one of the first African Americans on the Shreveport Fire Department had significant challenges. After living a life experiencing a lot of discrimination, it gave me a conviction that should I ever be in a position of leadership, that I would never allow anyone to have the same experience I had as a minority. That's why I was so surprised that writing a book for a Christian men Bible study would cause my career to come to an abrupt end.
These tombstones represent the lives that are taken by abortion every single day in the United States of America. This is a personal issue for me. When I found out that our pro-life club on campus was denied, it shot me right back to when I was 16 and I found out that my mom considered aborting me. When we got the news, I was angry. They were denying us the opportunity to express our diverse viewpoint on campus.
Since the physician-assisted suicide law was passed, it certainly brought home the reality that we're in a whole new world in the field of medicine. Being forced to talk to someone about committing suicide and ending their life artificially and having me be complicit with it violates my sense of conscience because my role is to protect life. This is something that really could end my practice. If I'm forced to do this, I won't continue to practice medicine in this state. I would leave my practice. There is no compromise here.
You are dealing with a number of issues in this country where people's faith life and the God-given right to life itself are being compromised by people within government.
In case after case after case, Father, we could do several programs about this, but the first person in the video we just saw was Chief Calvin Cochran. As Calvin said in the video, he grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, in dire poverty. And through the miracle of a faithful mother and strong faith in God, he was able to grow up, go to college, and he became the first African American to serve on the fire department there, rose to captain, ultimately became chief, and was then hired by the city of Atlanta, where he was an award-winning fire chief, bringing them into all sorts of conformity and all sorts of modern positioning that they had not had. Then President Obama appointed him the fire administrator of the United States, the highest position that a firefighter in the nation can have. He was unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate.
Wonderful.
Okay, fast forward. The mayor of Atlanta comes to Washington, implores him to return to Atlanta to take over the fire department. As a favor, he returns home. Of course, all this time, he is a Baptist layman. He teaches in his Sunday school at his local church, and he wrote a book on how to overcome sexual sin and other problems in life. 2 pages of the book dealt with homosexual behavior issues relating to what Scripture teaches. Mm-hmm. All right, this is on his own time.
And it was in line with what the Baptist Church teaches.
And it was done on his own time, on his own dime, and it was for those folks. City officials a year later came and said, we're suspending you for this. They investigated him for discrimination, found he had not discriminated against anyone, but ultimately fired him because of his private speech, his private writing for his own church in his private life.
So he had not fired people or refused to hire somebody on the basis of their sexual preference.
In fact, the chief was what he called anti-ism. He had grown up in an era of racism where he had to sleep in a separate bed from the other firefighters because he was an African American. He had to wash his dishes in scalding water, all these horrible things, and he would never allow that to be done to any other person because of their dignity and his respect and love for them as a Christian. Well, he's fired. We took his case, and by the grace of God, after several years of hard-fought litigation, the city of Atlanta has recently paid to Chief Cochran $1.2 million in settlement for taking his job wrongfully The federal district judge found that what they had done was inappropriate, it was wrong, a violation of his constitutional rights. So again, he stood, he was able to have a strong defense, and we upheld religious liberty in that case.
In a case like that, you do not defend people who, say, exclude folks on the basis of race or sexual preference.
No.
You don't encourage anybody to break the law
let's
in
look
those regards.
Let's look at another case that's been very prominent. Many of your viewers, I'm sure, have been following the case of Jack Phillips. Jack Phillips was the cake artist in Denver, Colorado. You may remember that Jack would sell anything to anybody, all the pre-baked goods. Even if you came in, no matter what you claimed your lifestyle was, or your preferences, sexual gender, whatever, he would sell you a pre-made cake or even a birthday cake or something like this.
Sure.
But he declined through the years to do things that violated his conscience and his religious faith as a Christian. For example, he would not make Halloween cakes with all sorts of demonic symbols and so forth. He said this is wrong. He would not make a cake in one case, he was asked to make a cake celebrating a divorce. He said, no, I cannot do that. Two men came to him and said they wanted a cake, a custom design, custom artwork, original creation, celebrating a so-called same-sex marriage. He said, I can't do that. I can sell you anything we've got, but I can't make custom original art for you. It would violate my conscience.
And the issue there is the expression of art is also within the realm of free speech expression.
You're being ordered to communicate a message you don't like. The Human Rights Commission in Colorado, and I don't know where they get these titles sometimes, Father, but they found he was liable. Some of the commissioners did such things as compare him to the Nazis at Auschwitz. Amazingly, Jack's father had landed at Normandy and was one of those who ultimately, troops who had helped liberate some of the death camps. So it was a particular insult for him to be compared to the Nazi guards that were tormenting Jewish people. But anyway, to get to the...
And he didn't throw cakes at anybody.
As we proceed on, the commission said he had to obviously conform. He would have to keep a record of every cake he made or declined to make, a written record, turn it into the government on a periodic basis. And he and his family, including his mother, would have to go to basically what we might call a reform school. He had to go to sensitivity training to have teachings on how to overcome his religious bias. He declined to do those things.
Wait a minute. Even his mother?
Yes, you can't make this up. She worked for him. He had 15 people at one time at his employee. So he had to suspend his wedding cake business, which is about 40% of his trade, and go into years, literally years of hard fought litigation. Last May, in 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court came down with a decision, 6-3, ruling that Jack, his rights, his constitutional rights had been violated and set aside the lower court rulings. But the state of Colorado decided to pursue him anyway. Another person came and said, we want a cake celebrating our gender transition. They wanted it to be blue on the inside, pink on the outside, creating a message, communicating a specific message, contrary again to Jack's understanding as a Christian of God's creation of male and female. Mm-hmm. And Jack, again, could not do it. So at this point, Alliance Defending Freedom brought a case on behalf of Jack to try to get ahead of this thing before years and years of litigation. A federal judge has ruled that case can go forward, and we're into the battle. But we have a florist in the state of Washington. Some people may be watching.
Sure.
Arlene's Flowers, Baronelle Stutzman. This grandmother, this sweet, dear woman who served an individual who identified as gay for a decade. He was one of her best customers. They were friends. They loved each other. But one day he came in and said, Baronelle, in addition to all the stuff you've been selling me and providing, I want you to do a custom expression. I want you to design my wedding with my same-sex partner. At that point, Baronelle prayerfully said, I can't do that. I love you. I cannot do it. They talked about who some other people were that could possibly do it, that didn't have the same moral or religious views. He left, but ultimately the Attorney General of the state of Washington brought a case against Barronelle, and they're suing Barronelle not just for some damages and not just like Jack ordering them to keep records, but in this case, they're suing Barronelle for everything she has. The legal fees, the expenses that have been racked up in the case so far would take everything this grandmother owns, her business, her home, everything. The Supreme Court also last year ruled that that case had to be remanded back in the light of the Jack Phillips case, and it's in the Washington state courts again, going through the system. So we have, there are cases at every stage, Father, involving these kind of things. And in the video, we had the medical people. We had the young lady who was mistreated because she wanted to put a pro-life display on our campus. And I might tell the viewers, they'd be excited to know this, she is now in the process of becoming a religious sister. Since this video was made and as this case proceeded, she is in the early stages of preparing for a life as a religious.
See, and here, the number of things here now, so folks understand, you have won quite a few cases over the years at the Supreme Court.
The Lord has been unbelievably good to us. In fact, Father, before I say anything else, I'll say the theme verse of Alliance Defending Freedom is John 15:5, where we acknowledge that without Christ we can do nothing, no thing. He has granted, in our case, 9 wins in the U.S. Supreme Court in the last 7 years. In fact, one of the secular publications that monitors these things has actually said that Alliance Defending Freedom in this most recent 5-year period is the most successful law firm in the entire United States in winning cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. That's something only God could do. And in every case, it's defending people of faith. Another case that we had that would fit in that number was Trinity Lutheran case. This is a little Lutheran church down in Missouri. And you may have heard this case. The state of Missouri, like many states, has a tire recycling program. You say, what's that got to do with religious freedom? Well, you know, when you get a new set of tires in your car, you pay like $3 and they take your old tire and chop it up. Well, in Missouri, one of the things they were doing with old tires was making them into playground surfaces to put on children's play yards to
instead of the gravel or the tar we had when I was a kid.
And to protect them from the scraped elbows and the broken arms that you and my friends had in our youth. And the Lutheran school, which has non-Christians as well as Christian students, applied for the program. They were up high on the qualification list, but lo and behold, just before it all came to be, somebody said, oh, stop. Giving shredded rubber tires for a church school parking lot and protecting those children from scrapes and broken bones would violate the so-called separation of church and state. You can't make this up.
And separation of church and state is found in which amendment in the Constitution?
As we both know, it is not found in the United States Constitution anywhere.
It's in the Soviet.
In the Soviet and a few other places. But in Missouri was one of the states with the old Blaine amendments, which happened in the 1880s as a result of anti-Catholicism. Well, anyway, let's go forward. That case advances through the courts, and the United States Supreme Court declared without reservation that this was a discrimination that not only sets a precedent for letting that church have a rubber tire parking lot, a play lot, but removes a lot of barriers from a lot of other cases. The anti-religious liberty crowd went nuts over that one, but it's had some good impact, and we're seeing a lot of cases now following it where we say that basically because you're a religious institution, because you're a church, because you're a Christian apostolate or a Catholic entity, you can't be excluded from participation in the public square. Because what they actually did was create a hurdle higher for people who were of faith than everybody else.
And this goes
We
back
could go on and on with these.
to a Supreme Court case that was actually, the majority was written by a Supreme Court judge from Alabama, and Hugo Black. And this was a case where the principle of separation, a wall of separation between church and state, was put into his decision.
Yeah, actually, in his dissent in that particular case involving, he took the letter. Many of your viewers, of course, have heard this phrase over and over, which came from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptists, Danbury, Connecticut Baptists. Well, actually what happened, the Baptists said, hey, Mr. Jefferson, you've been elected president. Connecticut has a state church. The taxpayers of Connecticut support a church. We as Baptists would like you to come in and do something about that. Jefferson,
And I think they were also not protected as Baptists. They did not have protection with the Congregationalist church being the state religion.
And so Jefferson wrote back, hey, I can't meddle in those affairs because of this separation, the wall of separation between the church and the state. Exactly the opposite meaning of what Hugo Black applied. This all dates back actually to Roger Williams in his book, The Bloody Tenet of the Revolution. I'm getting into too much detail, Father, but in there he said, the wall, there needs to be a wall of separation to protect the garden of the church from the terrors of the state.
And that was the key thing, that phrase was used to protect the church from the state.
From the state.
And Hugo Black used it to protect the state from the church because we were so dangerous.
So it was a complete flip in terms of the meaning that even Jefferson had in that letter. And interestingly, since Black's opinion, there was a study done of the original letter. There's a professor at American University who's written a book about this, and they used a special scientific instrument, and they could see through the layers of ink.
Yes.
And they saw what Jefferson had written below what was on top. And I'll leave it for readers who are interested to go on one of the internet sites and research it. But some of the words that are below even show more clearly what Jefferson's clear intent was. It was to basically say, I can't meddle with the church.
Right. And Black was using it precisely to keep benefits away from Catholic school students.
To treat Catholics and Christians differently than other citizens.
Right.
Another case we had like that.
Well, we're going to have to take a break.
See, we can just go forever.
Yeah,
can't
I
we,
know
Father?
it. I know we can't because limitation of time. But we, I just want to make sure that folks also understood that this was part of Black's membership in the Ku Klux Klan, where he was a leader of the Klan before being on the Supreme Court, and his Masonic anti-Catholicism. And this got brought from his prejudices to actually have an impact against not only Catholics, but other Christians as well. And this is something that we want to make sure that you learn more about the Alliance Defending Freedom and their work to protect religious liberty. You can go to adflegal.org, adflegal.org, or if you have an international concern, it is adfinternational.org, and find out more at their websites. But we're going to come back and continue this conversation talking about the need for us to stand up for our religious freedom. So please stay with us. right. You know, we've been talking about religious freedom, but you also defend the freedom and right to life.
Absolutely.
And in that little clip that we showed, we had that one case of a doctor who's being forced to tell patients about
End of life issues.
end of life. In other words, that you have to be counseled that you can kill yourself.
Yes.
Or have somebody else do it for you.
This is where we're headed. And in many, many areas, healthcare professionals at every level, pharmacists, nurses, doctors, various healthcare workers, healthcare professionals are being told that they have to not only provide advice and information on things that violate their conscience and their sense of
Like
what is moral, right, and
abortion,
wrong,
birth
but also
control.
to foster and further it. There was a case in California a few years ago that we were not involved in, but you remember a doctor there was ordered that she had to be part of a so-called gender transition case, a woman of faith. There are cases involving all of these things. We had a case, one that I'm very thankful for, and again, talking about what you can do about it. Kathy Decarlo was a nurse at one of the most well-known, prestigious hospitals in New York City. She was Philippine. She was a tremendous, well-recognized professional. And when she had come on with the hospital, she had negotiated to make sure that it was clear that she would not be involved in any case taking or participating in the taking of innocent human life. So this was actually in her employment agreement. But one Sunday morning, they called her in, said, we've got an urgent emergency case. We need your help. And it turned out to not be an emergency at all. It was a regular abortion. And she was threatened very vigorously that she would lose her employment. She would have all sorts of sanctions imposed if she would not get involved. Well, ultimately, she stood. And she brought a case, and the Department of Health and Human Services investigated it, found that the hospital had clearly violated her right of conscience, executed an agreement and an order with the entire hospital chain throughout New York, with millions of people impacted, that they could never do that to one of their employees again. And in the previous State of the Union address in 2018, she was one of the guests up in the balcony, being honored for her pro-life stand. She's testified before Congress, she's testified before state legislators. So this is how one person with no background in any kind of protest or any kind of legal area can take a stand, Father.
And one of the things I want to, I think will help clarify, why are people being forced to push for abortion and birth control and euthanasia? There was a line by Nancy Pelosi when she was Speaker of the House the first time. She said on George Stephanopoulos' show that we have to include birth control and abortion. Think of all the money we'll save. If we don't let them get born, we won't have to pay for them with the health care. And I said then, the first year of life is the second most expensive medical year you have. Your last year of life is usually your most expensive year. So if they want to save money in your first year, then they're going to want to save money in your last year. And that while on one hand, folks in the state want to have care for everything, we'll provide all your care, but now you're too expensive, so we want to kill you.
Father,
either in abortion or in euthanasia. And this is why they are pushing this stuff, because they have to protect overspending for the promises that they've made in healthcare.
This certainly may be one key reason, and another key reason, Father, is what is your view of humanity? Are we imago Dei? Are we made in the image and likeness of God? Do we believe in the teaching of our church's Proclamation, Dignitas Humani, that every person is entitled to dignity? that every person is endowed by their Creator with certain rights that are unalienable, that cannot be taken away?
Or like the movie, they shoot horses, don't they?
Are we just protein floating around in a fluid body that will terminate at some point? And
like
so
you do a cat or a dog that's
so everything,
too sick.
Well, and of course cats and dogs now have in some places more rights than people at the end of life, certainly, and unborn children have far less rights than cats and dogs have in many jurisdictions in this country. You know, and so this clash of worldviews, Father, is impacting every aspect of our life, and particularly those caught in the middle are people who are in the healthcare profession that have faith. And there are those in the healthcare profession who have actually said that those who want to follow their faith should not be allowed to be in the profession. They should be weeded out, they should be terminated, they should be mandated into compliance.
And there they go back to their termination language once again.
And because this is, it's, you know, you must obey the state.
This is one of the key issues, because the Declaration of Independence makes it clear that you have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but they are not granted by the state.
They're granted
and
by...
they cannot be taken away by the state.
They're endowed by our Creator.
Exactly.
And 5 times that declaration, of course, refers to nature's God and the God of the universe, the Creator of all things.
Right.
And we understand, again, as people of faith, that we're created in that image and likeness of God.
And this was exactly the same argument you saw after the Dred Scott decision. Were people of African origin human beings or not?
Well, and actually, you remember the Supreme Court of the United States ruled 7-2 that they were not people.
Exactly.
Because of the color of their skin, they were not human beings, and therefore did not have rights to life and to what we would call normal freedom, normal free exchange as human beings.
And this is where Abraham Lincoln and his newly formed Republican Party was arguing on the basis of the Declaration of Independence that they are human beings and they have the same unalienable rights.
And Father, you remember
Douglas was arguing against that and ridiculed Lincoln for saying that blacks were equal. Now we're applying those same arguments and the same party differentiations over infants and the elderly and the terminally ill.
And, you know, in thinking about going back in history, you remember the 2 founding precepts of the Republican Party were what? To protect marriage from being redefined and to, they call it the last 2 vestiges of barbarism. Redefinition of marriage, which was polygamy at that time, and to end slavery. Here we are today. What are the 2 greatest threats to religious freedom in America today? The redefinition of marriage and all the things that relate to those issues and those that won't go along with the agenda, and the issue of life. When does life begin and when is life entitled to protection? And we know now through science, we know that life clearly begins at conception.
Yeah. Anything else is arbitrary.
There's no possible argument to the contrary. Yeah. We know that that fertilized egg becomes the person sitting in these chairs.
All the DNA for that person is
done.
There. No more new, no less.
So the only issue is, at what point does the state have the ability to tell people they can freely kill that life? And of course, that brings us to what's just happened in New York, where under this New York law, which some people say is because they fear the Supreme Court may repeal or overturn, whatever word you want to use, Roe v. Wade, they say New York's getting set up so that they can argue as a state that they have their own right to abortion. And of course, they have now decriminalized it, and they've also said that it doesn't require physicians, and they've given immunity to people that would be involved in taking the life of a child up to the last possible second.
And this shows that their rhetoric is merely rhetoric, because the whole point that they had made with Roe versus Wade is that a woman should be able to go to have a safe abortion at the hands of a
Safe, fair,
physician.
and legal was the term they used.
Right.
And now they make it, as Cardinal Dolan recently said, they make it exactly the opposite. They make it unsafe because we say you don't have to have a physician. It's not rare at all. They want the government to fund
Well,
it.
60% of all children in New York City that are conceived get aborted.
The most dangerous place in New York City is to be in your mother's womb.
Yep.
More people die in their mother's womb than any other place in
And
New
in
York
Washington
City.
it's the same, and in Moscow.
But the good news is, Father, as we talk about these depressing things and even think about the horror of them lighting up the Empire State Building with pink lights to celebrate this death, it should have been blood red for the blood of the that cries out from the ground. But there are people standing up and protesting this and standing for their rights. And the thing that I'm excited to say with Alliance Defending Freedom is we've been honored and privileged to stand with healthcare professionals like Kathy Decarlo I mentioned early, and others who say, we will not go along with this regime. We will not go along with this. The first family in America to get an injunction against the Obamacare mandate on sterilization, contraception, and so forth was the Newland family. They have a company in Denver, Colorado called Hercules. They're a Catholic family. They're members of Legatus. They're very active in their parish and in their diocese. And they were up to be given the Business of the Year award by the city of Denver. When they filed suit saying we would rather lose our company and our 300 and some employees than to pay one nickel to take innocent human life, the city of Denver withdrew their award. All the wonderful things they'd done for their community and their employees didn't matter if they said we won't participate in killing children. But the Newlands won the first injunction ever granted in the United States. We were honored to represent them. And you know the rest of the history. Ultimately, in the case involving our client Conestoga Wood and Hobby Lobby, the Supreme Court upheld the bar against for-profit companies. And then a year later, we saw the bar on nonprofits go forward. That now the regulations.
Ewtn was part of that.
And of course, Ewtn, I'm so thankful for Ewtn standing in the gap. And that fight continues. Many people think, hey, it's gone away. You know, all the court cases have been won. The Trump administration has put pro-life people in the Department of Health and Human Services, and they've written new regulations. What many people don't know is that those regulations have been challenged by the same Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger philosophy type people, and we're still fighting the battle over whether or not people of faith who are employers will have to arbitrarily and mandatorily fund abortifacients for people that work for them.
Yep.
It's an absolutely outrageous principle, and I submit if we stand strong enough, we will see victory in this area. The problem, Father, is when we don't stand.
That's it. Let's just take a look at a few other cases. I have another clip for some of the other kinds of cases that you deal with. Let's take a quick look at that.
At the end of 2016, there was a state law that was passed that would force pregnancy help centers to refer for abortions. The thought of actually having to give an abortion referral to a young woman was just unbearable. This law is such a violation of my conscience. It's really unthinkable because it really totally erases the whole reason why I'm here, the whole reason why Aid for Women is here.
Five years ago, we were approached by a customer who asked us to print a message that conflicted with my conscience. So we respectfully declined the order, and I had another print shop who would print the same job at the same price, but they ended up going to our local government and they filed a lawsuit against us to try to get us in the future to print shirts that had a message that would conflict with my faith. I received a phone call after I made the decision to decline the message, and a gentleman called and didn't give me his name, and he just asked me, he said, "Are you sure you want to stand for this? Are you sure you're going to hold to your beliefs on this issue? I want to know before we do this." And I just said, I have no option. I said, I can't print that message, and he hung up on me. When that happened, I knew this wasn't going to be a small issue.
Every creative professional has a list of reasons why you would choose a project and why you would decline a project.
And that's true for everyone I work with. But there's a law in Minnesota that would force us to tell stories that conflict with our core beliefs. Preserving freedom of conscience is important for every single person. We don't want anyone to feel or fear that the government will punish them for simply holding an opinion that might be unpopular.
One of the great joys I have is leading a Christ-centered university, a faith-based university. This legislation, if it would have passed in its original form, would have ended up setting ourselves up for the possibility of being sued just for practicing what we believe.
One of the things that you see more different kinds of cases coming up, these people that we see in this clip had a conviction of their faith and they stood up. And there are a number of folks like this, but a lot of folks don't. You know, like one of my friends has a bumper sticker said, "Don't take my religious freedom from me, I'm still using it." But a lot of people are not. They're not going to church. They don't care about religion. They don't care if people of faith lose their freedom of religion. And how important is it to contact the legal resources as well as have courage of your convictions?
Well, one particular point I want to make, St. John Paul II wrote about this at length. Religious freedom and right of conscience are the underlying support of all other freedoms.
Yep.
In the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted after World War II, after the horrors of what happened in Nazi Germany and across Europe,
the Empire of Japan.
They declared that among the most basic of human rights is religious freedom and right of conscience. Throughout history, everyone who has studied this issue, has dealt with this issue, understands that when religious freedom and right of conscience are diminished for people of faith, everybody else is a loser.
Yep.
Again, you talked about the Soviet Union and the other segment, Father. We saw when religious freedom went down, freedom for everybody went down. Right of conscience is something that everyone, even non-religious people, have a right to follow. Now, what we see in the cases that we've talked about is people who have had courage. Somebody asked me one time, if you were on trial for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Mm-hmm. I pray there would be. And these are people that clearly understand that they are standing not just for themselves and their principles, but for these eternal, timeless principles and for everybody else in this nation and actually in this world. The woman who talked about the being ordered at her abortion counseling, I mean, here's a pro-life center, Father. It's been formed solely for the purpose of saving human life. And they come in with a state law in California and they say, you must refer for abortion. You must give details out in different language segments and all sorts of things. And I'm delighted to tell you that case was also won at the United States Supreme Court last June. Our lawyers were honored to represent the National Institute of Family Life Advocates. But Father, we only can do cases if people stand.
Exactly. And if you don't bring a case and stand up against the infringement of your religious rights and freedoms, lawyers can't help you.
And the T-shirt printer there, one of the largest in the state of Kentucky, had 35 employees. They came in and said, we want you to do this message again. The government ordered him to produce things that had messages that were clearly contrary to his conscience and the most basic teachings of his faith. He declined to do it. I'm delighted to tell you he's won the lower court. He won the Court of Appeals. The case is now in the Supreme Court of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Mm-hmm. We pray that he wins. Please pray for him. Yep. But in every one of these, Father, it's because people cared enough to exercise and live their faith. As I started the program, Pope Francis, in one of his earliest discussions of religious freedom, said that Christianity, that Catholicism is not about just what you do in the Mass, just what you do in Sunday in church, or even if you're a daily communicant. It's not just in the church. It's how you live your life 24/7.
Every day.
And Father, I know you and your program, as you talk to different people, you talk about the proclamation of the gospel, not just with words, but with our lives. And we're called to do that in every aspect of our lives. As the baptized, as the faithful, it is our duty to carry forward our faith into the world and to live in conformity with the teachings of our faith. And no government should ever interfere with the ability of people to follow that faith, to follow the truth, and to conform their conscience accordingly. And the good news is, in hundreds of cases, our ministry came into existence, Alliance Defending Freedom, 25 years ago. We've been blessed to represent hundreds of people across the globe, and we've seen amazing success, like on college campuses. Public colleges and universities, we've had over 400 wins on behalf of students and faculty members who have stood against suppression of their freedom of speech, rights of conscience.
That's why I suggest to parents, ask if there is freedom of speech on a college campus before you are willing to pay good money to go to that school for your kid. It's important. Tomorrow, we'll be celebrating Holy Thursday, and one of our Lord's words at the Last Supper is, "Be not afraid." And so this is something that we have to remember, and thank you for what you've been doing. And people should know they can go to adflegal.org or adfinternational.org for help if they should need it. I want to thank you for being here with us, and also want to give you all a blessing as we go into this Easter Triduum. May Almighty God bless you and keep you and cause His face to shine upon you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And not only do we want to wish you a blessed Holy Week and blessed Easter, and urge you to participate in your parishes as much as you possibly can to worship, hear the scriptures, and gain courage and strength to be able to stand for Jesus, His church, and His holiness. And God bless you all this week.
Thank you.
Thank you.